Welcome to today's devotion from Christ Lutheran Church in Pewaukee, Wisconsin. I'm Pastor Tim Gerbing. Today we take a look at the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 4, and I'll read there verses 12 and 13. When Jesus heard that John was put in prison, he withdrew into Galilee. He left Nazareth and went to live in Capernaum, which is by the sea, in the region of Zebulun and Naphtali. Normally, when you think of Jesus' hometown, you think of Nazareth, and it was for a large part of Jesus' life. He was born in Bethlehem, and when a toddler, his parents moved him to Egypt to escape Herod's attempt to find and kill him. And then after a while, his parents returned to Nazareth. Jesus would live there until he was 30 years old, when he finally left to begin his ministry. Now, what caused Jesus to move at that time was that word reached him that there was a strange man named John who had been preaching and baptizing down south nearby the Jordan River, and that this John was dressed like the prophet Elijah from Old Testament days. Jesus would have concluded that this was the forerunner to his work, the one whom the Old Testament prophets foretold would immediately precede the appearance of the Messiah. So Jesus went to see for himself. And now knowing that this indeed was the one his father said would come, Jesus offered himself for baptism and began his ministry. Perhaps a few months to a year or so later, Jesus heard more news about John the Baptist, but this time the news was bad. John was arrested. Once again, news about John would cause Jesus to make a change in his own movements. Opposition to the message of John was growing, and opposition, Jesus knew, would arise against him too. Jesus was not scared off, though, by John's imprisonment. Instead, he did what would allow him to best do his work. No longer would Nazareth be his home. He remained in Galilee, but moved away from Nazareth to Capernaum, a more densely populated area that was lying on the northwestern shore of the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum was a bustling town with about 1,500 residents. It was a major economic center for northern Galilee, and it lay along a busy trade route. From there, Jesus could easily travel to all the districts of Galilee. He could preach and teach in its villages throughout the region. And whenever he'd return for a while to Capernaum, he could keep on top of what was going on among the Jewish people. We see the heart of Jesus here. The ministry he undertook was to save souls. It was essential that the true and full message of God's gracious and forgiving love be proclaimed by him before he gave up his life to pay for the world's sins. Jesus was handicapped in a way. His work was limited by his human nature. He would get tired and hungry. His travel was limited by how far he could walk. There would be times when he'd need to leave one region and go to another because of the danger to him and his disciples. But there's nothing that can hinder him now. He has accomplished all that he was required to do to save us. His righteous life was lived on our behalf. His precious life was sacrificed to redeem us from sin. His corpse was revived and resurrected in glory. What we have in Jesus now has no limits. Jesus is always at hand, with his full divine power at the ready for every one of his children. Thank God for the marvelous way that God's Son has saved us. Amen.